Hey everyone, I'm Goofyword, back with another Commander deck tech. Today we're talking about Kenrith, the Returned King, but really this deck is about a set of cards called the Advocates. And what these cards do is put cards back into your opponent's hand from their graveyard. I like to think of this deck as kind of like if you were at Thanksgiving dinner and you just ate a huge, delicious meal, and then your grandmother brought out like 4 pies and was like, "Oh, honey, keep eating. You can't not have pie." And so you keep stuffing yourself with pie, and it ends up hurting you. And that's kind of what these advocate cards are going to do. They're going to do something good for our opponents, but then we're going to win the game by using cards that deal damage according to how big their hands are. It's a really, really cool deck. It's a really weird deck, and I'll just tell you straight up, it is pure jank, but I think you're really going to enjoy it. Let's take a look. Looking at the actual advocate cards themselves, there are 4 advocates. 3 of them are white and 1 of them is green. There's Spurn Mage, Shield Mage, Pulse Mage, and Null Mage Advocate. And all of these cards have the same basic ability to return cards from your opponent's graveyard to their hand in return for some powerful effect. One of them is going to prevent combat damage, one of them just destroys an attacking creature, one of them destroys artifacts and enchantments, and the last returns a creature from your graveyard to the battlefield. We're going to use Pulse Mage Advocate to get back the other advocates if they ever die, but we also have a few other options like Skullwinder or using Kenrith's ability to return a creature from our graveyard to the battlefield. These are ways that we can make sure our advocates stay alive throughout the game because they are the cornerstone of the strategy. If we're just giving our opponents 1, 2, or 3 cards from their graveyard, they will just keep casting them and they'll probably be thankful for it. In order to really give them that stuffed Thanksgiving feeling, what we're going to have to do is make sure that they can't just discard them at the end of turn. Our goal is to make sure that our opponents have hands of 10, 15, 30, 50 cards so that when we use our finishing spells, we can kill them really quickly. There are a few cards that completely eliminate the hand size rule for all players. People usually think of Reliquary Tower for themselves, but you can also use Anvil of Begarden to encourage extra draws every turn, or you could use Price of Knowledge, which functions both as a finisher and an enabler, or Folio of Fancies, which is going to allow us to draw cards and make sure that our opponents can't just discard all the nice gifts we've been giving them. In addition to our advocate plan to keep putting the same cards back into our opponent's hand from their graveyards, we'll use cards like Forced Fruition to make sure that they continue to draw way too many cards at a time, and we can use Coveted Jewel to make our opponents draw 3 cards every time they attack us or the player who controls Coveted Jewel. Usually this is a huge liability because you don't want your opponents to draw 3 cards and steal your giant mana rock, but in this deck you're happy about it because 3 more cards in their hand and there's no way they're going to have the mana required to cast all those spells before we can use one of our finishing effects. At a certain point in the game, your opponents are going to realize that having 16, 17 cards in their hand started out as a good thing, but is actually turning into a liability, and that's when we're going to use our finishing cards to win the game. There are several different instants that deal damage to a player equal to the number of cards in their hand. Some opponents won't realize what's happening in time, and by the time they realize they should be trying to clear their hand, they will have 30 cards already, and a single one of these spells will win you the game. To actually win the game, we'll use cards like Stormseeker, Gaze of Adamaro, and Sudden Impact, which deal damage equal to the number of cards in target player's hand. We'll also use things like the triggered ability from a Sword of War and Peace, or the monstrous trigger from a Storm Breath Dragon. Kenrith the Returned King is an excellent commander for this deck because he gives us access to all 5 colors, and his different abilities are really helpful at different points in the game. This deck is, like I said at the beginning, very janky, so having the gain life option is always helpful. Also, the draw a card, or rather, target player draws a card, is also very helpful because we can continue to add cards to our opponent's hand whenever we have some extra mana or when our advocates aren't on the battlefield. Also, his black ability, 4 and a black to return a creature card from a graveyard to the battlefield, is really, really helpful for maintaining presence of our advocates so we can keep tapping them and restocking our opponent's hands. So that's the deck. I hope that you learned something about maybe some cards you've never heard of before. I promise you that if you bring this to the table, people are going to have a good time. There's nothing like the panic on people's faces when you go from, oh wow, I'm drawing some cards, oh wow, my opponents are helping me, they're putting some cards back from my graveyard, to, I can't cast all these. What's going on? This can't be happening. And then losing because you have 40 cards in your hand and you just get burned out of the game. It's a really goofy deck. It's a really fun deck, and I hope that you enjoyed it. I'm Goofyword. Check in for all of the latest deck techs on the coolest, weirdest strategies. And until next time, have a great day.